Welcome back to part 2 as we look at Genesis chapter 22, and the Lord will provide is our topic of discussion. Now, God calls to Abraham in Genesis chapter 22, and listen to the words that he says in verse 2. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Now, let me just ask you this question. Can you imagine the emotions? Can you imagine the intensity in Abraham at hearing this command? Think about how you would feel. Think about how you would think about this command. This goes against all common sense, all logic, all reasoning, all rational thinking. How could God ask for this? This is kind of what we do sometimes. We go about this same process. How could God ask this? How could He ask me to do this? How could He ask for me to make such a sacrifice? How could He ask me to give so much? And then we think, this can't be right. But the one thing that I think had to be going through Abraham's mind is this: Isaac is our miracle child. God said all the nations of the earth would be blessed through this child. Now God is commanding me to take him and sacrifice him, to give him up as a burnt offering. These two things do not mesh. They do not make sense together. So how can these two things reconcile? Yet this is the command. This is what he is told to do. So we can't help but be amazed at Abraham's obedience, because it is an immediate obedience. Abraham doesn't sleep in. He doesn't drag his feet. He gets up early in the morning and starts making the preparations and sets off to obey the commands of God. How can Abraham do this? Why is Abraham able to have this kind of faith? How can he have this faith in the face of such great sacrificial command of him? Think about these things as we continue to study this chapter. Now, there is a tremendous amount of foreshadowing that the author wants the reader to see as this account unfolds. The first foreshadowing is found in verse 4. It's on the third day that Abraham saw the place from afar where the sacrifice would be made. The third day is a picture in the scriptures as the day of the Lord's deliverance and restoration. The prophet Hosea declared in Hosea 6, verses 1 and 2, "Come, let us return to the Lord, for He has torn us, that He may heal us. He has struck us down, and He will bind us up. After 2 days He will revive us. On the third day He will raise us up, that we may live before Him." It's on the third day that Esther goes in to save the Jews from their death sentence. It's on the third day that Hezekiah was healed from his death sentence. The next foreshadowing happens in verse 5. Abraham tells the young men to stay there with the donkey as he and his son go up to worship. Then they will come back. Now, some say that this is what Abraham had to say, because if he hadn't said they were going to worship, he has said, "I'm going to sacrifice the boy," then they would have tried to stop him. But we have to understand that Abraham is the master here, and Abraham can do whatever he wants to do. No one is going to stop him from doing that. So the reason why Abraham says what he says is because he believed that he and his son would return. If you look at verses 6 through 8, when Isaac asks where the lamb is for the sacrifice, notice what Abraham says. And I don't think Abraham is just not trying to upset his son. I think he really believes this. He says that God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering. Now think about what he has just said. The Lord will provide for himself the lamb. Isaac, don't you worry. God is going to provide what we need. The cost will come from God. It's not going to come from us. He's going to provide this lamb for himself. The writer of Hebrews gives us an amazing insight into the mind of Abraham at this moment. Look at Hebrews 11, verses 17 through 19. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his son, of whom it was said, "Through Isaac shall your offspring be named." He considered that God was able to even raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Now, God said that the offspring were going to come through Isaac. Then God said, "Offer this child to me as a burnt offering." And so Abraham tells his servants that they would come back after worshiping. Abraham has told Isaac that God would provide the lamb, and he recognized that if it comes back, God can even raise his son from the dead. Now let me ask you this question. Up to this point in Scriptures, how many people have been raised from the dead? Not a single one. Not at this point, not in the record of Scripture anyway. No one has been raised from the dead. So why did Abraham think that he was coming back down this mountain with Isaac? Abraham has learned the faithfulness of God. It's something that at this point he truly understands and truly believes. Abraham has learned through his failures and God's successes, like the miraculous birth of his son, that God keeps his word. Join us for part 3.